NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.
Welcome everyone, friends, teachers, writers, kids, family, National Writing Project Network, parents who stumbled upon this interesting show that we are having. My name is Brian Ripley Crandall, and this is The Right Time. It's a National Writing Project series that's bringing authors of children's and young adult literature together with National Writing Project teachers. I'm a boy from Central New York. I'm wearing my Writing Our Lives shirt from the organization we started at Syracuse University, and I have a friend from Central New York who's Laurie Halse Anderson, who I'm very excited to be with us today. And actually, I thought this is amazing because I have another good friend, Rebecca Marsick from Connecticut, who works with me with the Connecticut Writing Project. And of course, Tanya Baker, the girl from Maine, who's now on the West Coast, who is co-hosting the show with me today. So welcome to The Right Time.
Brian, when you proposed this series for the National Writing Project, I said, sounds fantastic. I love it. And then you started naming young adult authors who you thought might join us. And for a while I thought, you're crazy.
Yeah.
I am Tanya Baker, the Director of National Programs of the National Writing Project. Glad to be here with all of you today, and my co-host and co-producer, Brian Ripley Crandall. We have been so excited to bring the expertise of these incredible writers and teachers in conversation with one another, and I'm absolutely thrilled that we can bring Laurie Halse Anderson to the National Writing Project Network. Really, I think, Laurie, your work lives so richly in the network already, I should say. I'm glad to bring us to you today. And we want to thank Trevor Ingerson of Penguin Random House for his enthusiasm and hard work in making this interview possible. So thanks to Trevor too. Thanks especially to you, Laurie, for being here. As the host prerogative, I'm going to start my introduction by telling a little story about the first time I met you, which was at a National Council of Teachers of English convention, where I got in line with all the other teachers and moms and fans who wanted to get the newest Laurie Halse Anderson book. And while I was in that line, I called my 10-year-old daughter, who's now 20, but I called my 10-year-old daughter to say, guess where I am? I'm in line to see Laurie Halse Anderson, and I'm going to get the next book after Chains, and it's going to be so exciting. And I was talking, it's a long line, so I got to talk to her for a long time. How excited I was. And when I got up there, I said to you, Laurie Halse Anderson, on the phone with my daughter. We're both so excited. And you said, give me that phone. And you took my phone and had this conversation, like in this huge convention hall, this long line, grabbed my phone, had this conversation with my 10-year-old daughter, who 10 years later will tell people, my mom is so awesome that she met Laurie Halse Anderson. I talked to her on the phone. So as mom, saying thank you. As a teacher, also thank you. I taught high school, I was teaching high school when Speak hit the stands, and I don't think that young adult literature was ever the same. Like, you opened these spaces and you have continued to push open spaces for what we're allowed to talk about in school and what kids are allowed to say and how they can see themselves. And we're so thankful to you for all of that. But let me tell anybody who might be listening who doesn't know who you are a little bit about you. Laurie Halse Anderson has received both the Margaret Edwards Award and the Allen Award. See, this is where I was supposed to change some screens so people can see. Laurie Halse Anderson has received both the Margaret Edwards Award and the Allen Award for her contributions to young adult literature. She's also been honored by the National Coalition Against Censorship in recognition of her fight to combat the censoring of literature. She's the author of the groundbreaking National Book Award finalist and Prince Honor book Speak. She's also author of the critically acclaimed YA books Prom, Twisted, Catalyst, Wintergirls, and The Impossible Knife of Memory. She has authored a number of middle grade titles, including the Vet Volunteer series and the historical fiction Seeds of America trilogy, which includes Forge, ALA Best Book for Young Adults, Fever 1793, and the National Book Award finalist and Scott Adele Award winner Chains. That is such a mouthful. She and her husband live outside of Philadelphia. You can follow Laurie on Twitter at Halse Anderson and visit her at madwomanintheforest.com.
Yes, it's a true honor to have Laurie Halse Anderson with us today, and it is also a pleasure to introduce a friend and colleague, Rebecca Marsick from the Connecticut Writing Project. Rebecca has taught elementary school as well as English at both the middle and high school level. She's currently the literacy coach for the Westport Public Schools in Westport, Connecticut. She is co-author of the Scholastic Professional Text Stretching Beyond the Textbook, a literacy instructor for Fairfield University, and an associate with the Educator Collaborative. She's also a frequent presenter at local and national conferences. 3 years ago, Rebecca co-founded StoryFest, which is a celebration of storytelling through a partnership between the Westport Schools and the Westport Library. Rebecca can be followed at Rebecca Marsick on Twitter or at Marsick Reads on Instagram. It's a great pleasure to hand the show over to my friend Rebecca, and always great to see you, Laurie. So I enjoy the conversation to come.
Thank you. Laurie, I'm so thrilled to be here with you. As I told you, I've read all of your books, and just, you have been such an inspiration as a teacher, as a parent, as a reader. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say today. So we are going to start writing into our conversation, my conversation with Laurie. Inspired by Laurie's voice, I've really been thinking about speaking versus shouting. So Speak being the first book I read, and Shout being the most recent one, and they're, kind of the way that they come together. So if we could just take 3 minutes to write these prompts of what are some times where you have felt the need to speak, and what are some times where you have felt the need to shout, and then if there's time to think about what is the difference. So just 3 minutes for everyone to take to kind of brainstorm through these ideas.
I got the timer on, we're ready.
Thank you.
30 seconds. Okay, if we bring ourselves to a close, those ellipses, ... with a seed planted, and then writer's notebook for future writing. And we can bring the show back to Rebecca.
All right. I think maybe we'll hold on to our thoughts from there. And I in back of me, I have all these books that I have by Laurie. And as I was looking through them and putting them up earlier, I was thinking about just the wide range of topics that you write about. And in particular, I always come back to The Impossible Knife of Memory, because I feel like that's one that does not get enough press. And that book was so impactful to me, of the PTSD piece, because I've never read another book that really wrote about PTSD from the perspective of a child trying to help a parent. And I think that we have a lot of students in that position. And so that can be a really important book for them. So I was thinking about PTSD. You've written about enslaved people. You wrote about the impact of disease. I mean, how can we not think about fever right now?
Right.
Right. And the yellow fever. And then, eating disorders with Wintergirls. That used to be such a conversation piece in 8th grade when I taught that. Sexual assault, consent, all of these. And they're so real that I'm wondering about your research process. Like, when you research these issues, how do you decide what to keep in terms of like the facts of the research? And then how do you decide what to craft as a storyteller? Just all of that.
It's a mess. When I know that as educators, you guys have this. First of all, thank you for the work all the educators out there have been doing, especially this year. Oh my goodness. I mean, my hope and prayer for the world and our nation is that this time of absolute fire is going to help us make some changes that are long overdue, both in terms of equity and inclusivity, and beginning to honor each other all the time as like siblings, like seeing each other as we're country people, right? So you're my sister and I'm your sister. And there's so many pieces to that, but the one I want to speak to right now is that it also means respecting educators for the work you guys do, and paying you, and giving you the resources you need. Because when you look at the problems in our country, which you see reflected in so many of my books, when we look at the adults who are just making life so hard for so many people, all of those adults were once in someone's classroom. Right. So those of us in the education community, in the education very large village, we have the opportunity, both the authors and teachers, to create a generation of readers who are going to be better adults. And so you guys do extraordinarily important work. So thank you for that. Most of my books, you won't be surprised to find out, were born in rage, in anger. I find anger is a very great motivator for writing. There's just something about it and I'm just an angry woman all the time, mostly bitter and angry, because I'm from Central New York, so we kind of have a lock on that. But when a topic hits me, like PTSD and kids growing up in homes with parents who are really struggling to be a parent, to be a healthy adult, I just start absorbing information. I can read pretty quickly, so I just start with the reading. I start when I come across a fact-based book that's written by an expert, I'll go right to their endnotes and then their bibliography, and just keep on diving deeper and deeper into primary source research till I can find those experts. While I'm doing that kind of research, you know, I'm kind of researching and brainstorming at the same time. I know that often I see educators that teach kids kind of a recipe. You know, you do the brainstorm, and I think writing process is very personal. And so for me, research and brainstorming and writing is actually ongoing through the whole thing. Once I feel like I understand I have an understanding of the world I want to craft, then it's a question of putting all that to the side, because that's very intellectually driven. That's my brain. And for me, writing has to start from the gut. And like sometimes I have to write essays or things for publicity purposes. And oh my gosh, that's so excruciating, right? I have to like use my brain, and the writing doesn't flow. When I'm, especially in an early draft of a book, I take my head out of the equation, and I just let the voice bubble up and onto the page. And then for me, the revision process is trying to make sure that if it's a book that's got a lot of important facts in it, that those are grounded well within the story. But I don't want ever a reader to go, oh, I'm getting lectured to. Oh, look, I should memorize that for the test. You know, does that make sense to you?
Yes. And your books never, ever feel that way. Ever. I mean, so you're nailing it.
Well, you know why? It's also, I think, because my secret as a writer is I revise more than most people.
Okay.
I generally, which takes me longer to write my books, but like I know people who don't do as many drafts as I do, and I think I'm fussy.
Do you enjoy revising? Do you enjoy that better than the first draft?
Oh, yes.
Revision's my favorite part. I wish people would just hand me things that were written.
First drafts are agony.
Yeah.
And you know what? And there's actually, I'm going to take this totally off track now.
Please do.
Here we go. So, and this is so important, I think, to try to get across to emerging writers, right? It's really important to pay attention to the emotional component of writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes if you're writing about something that's intense, which I often do, there's that piece. But there's another piece that has to do with the voices in our head, right? And it has to do with how we're feeling about ourselves. I often say that when kids tell me they hate writing, what I hear is they're telling me they hate the way that writing makes them feel.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if you're a student and you're reading a finished book by a professional author who's gone through a million drafts, you're reading an end product. You didn't see that author's first draft. And so if they saw my first draft, they would never worry about their own writing again, because they're terrible. It's the first draft. And what happens is the temptation is when you're writing a first draft, that voice in your head starts telling you you're horrible.
Right.
And you get in this negative spiral, and then you begin to associate the act of writing with feeling even worse about yourself.
Yep.
And that's a challenging thing to learn how to cope with.
I think it's also what you said earlier, when kids hate writing, it's because they've been given a formula and they haven't been given choice, and they don't realize that they're all different, and their brain just doesn't work the way the formula has been given to them. You know, I think about all the times we say, write your thesis first, then decide what your body paragraphs are going to be. And it's like, but nobody really does that. How do you know what to write about until you've done some work to figure out what you want to write about? You know, so.
Whenever I end my books, I always go back and I often completely rewrite the beginning, because I need to get to the end to really understand it. So, and honestly, the word thesis and also the word theme, I think, are terrible words. You should never use them again.
Oh, I'm gonna quote you on that. And
yes.
Laurie says, because that makes me so happy.
Yeah.
The like debates we have about what's the definition of a theme, and it just
I don't know what a theme is. No one is ever. I mean, Linda Sue Park tries. Every time I see her, she tries to explain to me what a theme is, and I'm not buying it. Nope.
I love, thesis, claim.
And let's just point out too that words that are based from that come to us from Latin or Greek tend to be kind of crappy. They tend to be vague. So you want to look for like a word that's got Anglo-Saxon or Germanic roots, because generally those are built on nouns, on objects, or an action, as opposed to this philosophical stuff.
That's fascinating. Okay. Wow. I wish we had like 15 hours. I have so many things to teach me about. No, I was also just thinking about how you said you go right to the footnotes and the citations in text, and that to me is something we really need to teach kids more about, is how do you use the structure of nonfiction to help you do research, to help you, learn more, figure out what way to go. I think that's a really great idea.
Do you guys know who Melissa Stewart is? Have you ever heard of Melissa Stewart?
No.
Oh, you have to look her up. She's fabulous. So
Okay.
she is a nonfiction writer. I'm on a committee with her, but not only does she write her own wonderful nonfiction, but she's an advocate for nonfiction readers.
Okay.
And she's a wonderful blog where she interviews nonfiction. She talks about different strategies for nonfiction reading and writing. And yeah, she's your gal.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to look her up right after this.
Yep.
Okay. So, given the ideas you write about, and we've just talked about a bunch of them, you give your teen readers and adults space to work through emotions with the characters. So we read along with them, and if we've experienced anything like it, we feel these experiences as well. And I've seen you at NCTE, I saw you at the Fairfield bookstore, I've seen you many times, and you're so raw and emotionally giving of yourself to readers, which I think is what draws us all to you, is you're so real and so authentic. But I feel like that's got to be so emotionally draining and so difficult. So I'm wondering, like, what do you do for your own self-care, for your own preservation? And even now, you were just saying writing these books is really emotional. Yeah. So how do you take care of yourself when you're in these spaces where that's just so emotionally intense?
Well, it is emotionally intense, but it's also an incredible privilege when you have people who are asking, they've taken something away, something positive from a book I've written. And so they want to share back to me something of themselves. So it's like those are gifts. Like when people cry, I have a lot of tears have soaked my shoulders over the years, and they're sharing, that's like, they're nurturing me with their tears.
Yeah.
And I tell them it's a way of sharing water. And that's really important. I feel so fortunate that I have these kind of opportunities all the time. I hope we can continue them in a near future. But the other thing I take is I take long walks, very long walks whenever I can. And I think that helps keep me a little bit balanced.
Yeah. And I do notice on Instagram, you have lots of beautiful photos of nature that you see.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's, feeds you too.
Absolutely.
Because I do feel like that's one of the things I've seen so much and talked to teachers about is when the world feels like it's falling apart and you just want to figure out how to support students, how do you also support yourself in these, conversations? So finding a way to care for yourself and sort of find that time is so important.
Yeah.
That's good to know. So I also was thinking a lot about, I feel like you have been working for equity and justice for so long. I mean, your conversations way before the world has been talking about this. And I'm also going to add in here that, as a white woman, we have privileges, right? And we have things we need to acknowledge about our place in the world and our responsibility. And I was thinking about, you writing Chains and you writing Fever and writing about enslaved people and all the conversations that have come up with, who gets to tell what stories, right? And uplifting different voices. And you have done such a beautiful job in balancing all of this. And I'm just wondering, like, given the state of the world right now, like, what are you currently speaking about, shouting about? Like, how are you handling this uplifting of your own voice because you are a real ally? And I just am wondering what is going through your head right now with everything kind of converging, gender rights, Blackness, trans issue, all of these things. I know it's an impossible question.
Oh my gosh, where do you start with something like that?
I know.
I think that it's been really important for me on a daily basis to kind of check myself. And like, what if before I comment on something online, or make sure is that performative? you can just retweet something, or let somebody else's use your space and allow other people to tell their story from if you have more visibility or a platform. So trying to be really clear about what's performative and what's actually useful is something that I struggle with and am working on a daily basis. But the reason that I started researching the history of enslaved families during the American Revolution, that was 25 years ago. And it just there was one fact I learned when I was researching Fever 1793 that completely changed my life as an American. And it's when I found out that Benjamin Franklin had held people in slavery his entire adult life. And he had profited from the returns of people who had freed themselves if they were returned to the white person who was enslaving them, and they had advertised in Franklin's newspaper, he got a cut. And that just made me know that showed me that I knew nothing about our history.
Right.
And everything they told me was suspect, and I'd been lied to. And so that's how I got started. So I'm actually, I'm so thrilled to be alive at this moment. I'm so thrilled to be in a position of, and I think it's really important for people like us, not only to do our own internal work, but to talk to our other white people in our spaces, and to model, to model behavior, to model reading, to model listening, to model, passing the mic, to model, making sure that if you, for example, are on a committee of educators or organizers, make sure that first of all, you're inviting people from all kinds of different identity markers, but you're not just inviting them there to talk about, this is my identity marker, Right. You're bringing in authors from all different backgrounds to talk about their work. Yep. And we have a lot of work to do.
We do. And I'm so glad you just said that, because I feel like what I find myself saying more and more as I'm talking to the English department about, and the social studies department, what books are we reading, is it's not just books about people who are oppressed, but the beauty and the culture and the joy in all different cultures and people and races, religions, and genders. And, and that's a piece that I think I worry that we're so focused on making sure we know the history, which we need to know. Yep. That we don't want, I teach predominantly wealthy white kids. I don't want them to think that all other cultures and races and, are just about oppression. There's beauty and joy and brilliance in all of it. So that's a balance, that we need to think about as well. Absolutely. So I'm wondering, who do you read? Like, who are you reading right now? Who are you following?
We are living in a golden age of literature right now. This revolution tends to bring out the best of people and the worst of people. But in our community, we get to enjoy just absolute brilliance. Absolute brilliance. I want to make sure everybody is reading all of the books by Tiffany D. Jackson.
Yeah.
Oh, she's incredibly gifted author. Yeah. Her latest book is called Grown. It came out last month. No, it's coming out in October. I forget.
I don't know if it's out yet.
It might be in October. I got to read an early copy. That's one of the best things of my September 15th. I just looked it up.
Okay.
It's got a stunning cover, and so she's a great writer, and she's a very she almost writes thrillers.
Kids. And I loved Allegedly.
Oh,
right. I know. Yeah. So, and I had read The Bad Seed years ago. So I was like, everyone has to read this and let me hear it rhyme. It's so good.
Grown is about, it looks at power differentials. It's, a little bit the R. Kelly story.
Okay.
But it's really important for us, because obviously I talk a lot about sexual violence and things like that. And, white feminism has done a really bad job in, making sure that there's space for it's like we claim the space, right? So it's not that we're going to bring more seats to the table, it's that we're going to set the table on fire and then work with feminists from other communities to make sure that we rebuild it in a way that honors everybody.
Yep.
And Black girls have to struggle so much against our culture's early fetishes and sexualization of their bodies, and survivors of sexual violence and abuse in the Black communities do not get anywhere near the attention that white girls and women do.
Mhm.
And so I want everybody to read Grown by Tiffany.
Okay. Excellent. I love her work. I know. I keep hearing, she actually came to Storyfest last
Oh, did she?
September.
Yeah.
She did. And it was wonderful to talk to her, but she was talking about this book.
Yeah.
And she was like, I can't really tell you very much because it was still a year out. And so I'm always like begging people for arcs of things.
Yes, yes.
Please send them to me. Okay. So given all of these topics that we've talked about, race, sexual assault, gender, I think about the backlash that teachers get and the fear that teachers have in discussing them in classrooms.
Right.
Especially middle school, where I feel like we really need to be having these conversations.
Yeah.
Definitely in high school, and even elementary, we need to be talking about consent. We need to be talking about gender. We need, race, all of it. But there's this real fear of like that it's too political, right? Whereas I keep saying it's a human rights issue. This isn't politics. This is human rights. But how do you, like, what's your advice to teachers in convincing them or telling them, how do you go up against parents, up against a school system, up against a department chair, other teachers, in saying that like these are things that our children need to know because they're going to encounter them and they need them to be good citizens of the world, right? So how do we balance that in a classroom? How do we?
Well, first of all, I think that especially when you're talking about white educators feeling uncomfortable discussing race, first of all credit to them for admitting that. That's a good first step.
Yeah.
And we've got so many resources now. I hope that a lot of communities are going to, within districts, start having educator book clubs. Because if you can't talk to an adult about these issues or ask questions or be vulnerable and admit you don't know everything to another adult, you're never going to be able to teach it in a constructive or helpful way to children. Right. So for some topics, I think the first step is to acknowledge what you don't know, and you probably don't even know how much you don't know.
Yeah.
So that would be step one. When pushback from parents is almost always grounded in fear.
Yep.
And it's the parents' fear, not necessarily of the topic, but it's the parents' fear of not knowing, again, how to talk themselves to their kids about this topic. And I think that there's some, so let's bring them into our community and let's develop some parent resources. Let's make sure that parents understand how that so many kids sitting in your classroom are already dealing with these issues. And when parents shut down conversations or shut down books or things like that, the message that their kids get is, you can't talk to your parent about this. Don't bring this to me. And which is why we all have met so many people who are survivors of sexual violence. Sometimes it's incest, and you've got kids who are being traumatized about many different things in their lives. And we want them to have responsible, loving, trustworthy adults to turn to. We want to give them books that will help them process what they're going through, or might help them understand somebody else a little bit better. For schools that are so intent on censoring, and that's what it is, if it's public education and they are restricting access to literature, then they better not be letting their kids read any newspapers or magazines. You better not have any internet access in your schools, because God forbid the kids might learn that there's something out there in the world that could hurt them.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that sort of the uproar and disruption, frankly, the revolution that we're going through in America right now, will have one of the positive effects that will come out of it is that we will all realize, oh man, this is here. This has been here. All of these issues have been here. And by choosing to put our heads in the sand, we have failed our children. And so let's just acknowledge that and figure out how to not fail them anymore.
Yeah. I'm wondering, you made me think, have you ever done a parent group about consent and sexual assault based on Speak or Shout? Or is there a parent guide for either of them?
No, but I should probably write one, shouldn't I?
Well, I'm just thinking that would be really interesting if there was like a parent guide for, teachers to give. I mean, we could, I don't know, that just might be a different way to.
Years ago, I was visiting an international school in Doha, Qatar. And there was a group of moms, Muslim women from that community who were all moms, and this is a school that is taught in English. All the classes are in English, and it's an American curriculum, and international students whose families live in Doha, and a lot of the families who live in Doha send their kids there. And these moms were like, what do you mean? What do you mean my kid can, that was startling to them, and they were not really comfortable with it. So I was invited to come in and speak with them. And that was one of the best hours of my life, that conversation we had. And I would like to do more of that. I wish that the PTAs were still really a thing.
That sort of has fallen off.
So if you have any ideas, or if anybody out there has any ideas about how authors can, I think that's a really important piece, is reaching out to parents, who, if we remember that what makes parents and like school board members and stuff make these decisions that you and I don't agree with about limiting kids' access to books. If we remember that they love their children as much as we love our children and the children in our lives, and so we're operating from the same base, and that's something that bridges us. And let's be grounded in that love and concern we have for kids, and talk about how do we best prepare them for the world.
Yep. Yeah, I also you made me think. I saw in one of these coronavirus, the many different author interviews I'd been watching, Brendan Kiley was talking about how he really makes such a conscious effort to not just think about his child in the classroom, but every child in the classroom, right? And so you might not think this is an issue for your kid, and it might not be, but for someone else, and your child needs to be able to deal with those issues too, whether they're theirs or their friends, or, so I feel like we need to come back to this idea of community that has sort of left the United States culture. We're so individualistic, and that is causing such problems for how we educate, how we think, how we relate to one another.
And is this though where I don't know what your opinion is, but in the last 20 years I've watched a lot of schools go to a model where kids aren't all reading the same book at the same time, right? Where there's much more student choice.
Yep.
And that seems to me to be a good way of I don't want to say solve the problem, but it's a good way of giving kids access to books. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think much like writing, giving kids choice in how they write, we need to give them choice in what they're reading as well. Because not all kids like the same books. And also I worry about, what do we designate as like the whole class text? If I'm the privileged white woman who gets to decide that, right? And I'm coming from the books that I loved as a kid or as a college student who was an English major, that's, a real influence. And I'm finding one of the biggest problems is that because we've all read the same canon, right? People are unwilling to teach different things because they don't know them. And as a teacher, you don't really get time. We all need like sabbatical years to just read, And so it's a cycle that's really hard to break.
Did you see, Chris Crutcher wrote a blog post, I think it was last week, about To Kill a Mockingbird.
No, but I should look.
You should look it up and make sure that you share that.
That's a whole discussion too.
Well, Chris has been a real big advocate for To Kill a Mockingbird for way too long, and it's worth reading his thoughts on it.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so I have a couple quick fire questions for you because I have a feeling Brian and Tanya are going to come back on.
We should have scheduled this for 15 hours. We can do that again.
We really should have. I have so many more things I want to ask you about. Actually, before I do, I want to ask you about Thank You, Sarah.
Yeah.
Your picture book. You don't have any other picture books, do you?
Oh, no, I got a bunch of other picture books.
Do you have a bunch of them?
Yeah, I have.
How did I miss them?
Oh, girl. Come on.
All right.
Join the family.
I'm going to join. All right.
Actually, one of them is called Independent Dames, and it's a nonfiction, kind of like Sarah's, done by the same illustrator, stories of 88 women and girls who took active roles in the American Revolution that you've never heard of before.
Okay.
So yeah. I started out, actually my first book that was published and went out of print about 5 minutes later, was published in 1996. I started out writing picture books because my kids were little back then.
My gosh, I thought I was like your ultimate fan, and clearly I have failed in the picture book category.
Oh, you just have a little bit more reading to do in your
A little more to go. Thank you. I apologize.
No
I'm
worries.
curious about how you decided to write Thank You, Sarah. And it's such a great story and so important. So I'm curious about your process for that.
So the idea came to me from an assistant editor at Simon & Schuster, who was a little bit associated with the writing of Fever 1793. So she knew that I was a giant history nerd. And she said, she read an article about Sarah Josepha Hale and said, you might want to look into that. She also knew that Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. and so I looked into it, and Sarah Josepha Hale is just an extraordinary American that we don't know about very much because there was you don't want me to take a long time with this. So
no, take as much time.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
So Sarah Josepha Hale, right? Smart lady, a middle-class woman, white woman from New Hampshire who got educated because her brother went to Dartmouth and would come home and then tell her all of his lessons. And she wound up being widowed when she was pregnant with her 5th child. And she had to work. Her dad was an invalid. Her dad was disabled in the American Revolution, right? And so she's from New Hampshire. And she became the editor of Godey's Ladies magazine. And she would use her monthly column in Godey's Ladies magazine as the bully pulpit she was like Martha Stewart with a little bit more of an intellectual bent and political bent.
Okay.
And so Sarah, that's when she started. She gave all, she's the one who wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. She did all these great things.
Right.
But she was about not only the power of the pen, but also about helping America become America. And it was she who got women to advocate to make Thanksgiving a national holiday. And that is just an irresistible story for me.
I know. I loved it. And it's again, one of those books where I was like, how did I not ever learn this in all of the, Thanksgiving celebrations? And again, it's like the story that's been pushed aside, right? That hasn't been passed along, and no one cites who wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Right.
It's
Right.
just sort of a given that we all know it, but it's fascinating.
I think we should put together a history curriculum, K through 12. Okay. And which at every year you confront the lies that we've been told for generations.
Yep.
And you do deep research into who started this, who whitewashed this part of history, or who manipulated this fact, and then give students the tools to deeply investigate what happened and why, and who were the power holders.
Did you ever read the book Lies My Teacher Told Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just that idea of like, let's look at all these things that didn't, what we thought versus what was. And that's old. I mean, I read that 20-something years ago. Yeah. So there could be a really new version of that one now, and it would be like a gajillion pages long. It would take years and years to read. Yeah. Okay. I don't want to stop our regular conversation, but I know they're going to come back, and I am really curious about these quick fire questions.
All right.
So where's your favorite place to write?
Any place I have a piece of paper.
Really?
That's all I need.
Wow. Okay. What's your least favorite food?
Lima beans.
Really?
Oh, horrible. I mean, they're good to feed to pigs. If you like.
Were you ever forced to eat lima beans?
All the time. I'm from Central New York, man. We have hardcore parents there. They don't mess around.
Lima beans every night. Yeah, that hasn't taken off like Brussels sprouts in the like culinary. No one's figured out how to make lima beans amazing.
They don't deserve to be eaten. They're horrible.
Okay. Which of your characters is most unlike you?
That's a great question. I would have to say in Catalyst, the main character, Kate Malone, although obviously, her dad's a minister. My dad was a minister. I've heard from that. But I really went out of my way in that book to try to write about a girl who looked at the world differently, and she looks at the world through the lens of kind of math and science, and that's not me at all. So that was in terms of the writing, that was really interesting way of getting outside my own experience and head.
Was it hard to write her?
Yeah.
Because of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever you're not writing your own stuff, right? but in some ways, you know, obviously I had to do a lot of extra research for the 2 times that I've written from a male perspective. But looking back on it, I think I put just as much research into trying to understand why do people like math and science, and like how does that make the world feel to them in a way that might be different than the world feels to somebody who's so word-based like me. So
Right.
I put a ton of research into her.
Interesting. So I'm totally going off. I have 2 more, but it made me think. So then was Shout difficult to write because it was it's your first book and verse, right?
Yeah, no, the poetry was the easy part.
Okay.
What was hard about that book? Well, first of all, I wrote a lot of really bad poems that thankfully I hope none of them made it into the final project. And you have to kind of
imagine a bad poem from you, but
hundreds of poems that just didn't make the cut. But it was the challenge for that book, I think, was number 1 was structuring it, how to structure it in a way that made sense. And I don't know that we fully solved that problem. And also, this is where it shows you where a good teacher or a good editor plays a part, because in the original draft that I sent my editor, Kendra Levin, all the stuff that happened to me in high school, I really didn't write about. You know, I had the pretty graphic scene of being sexually assaulted, and then like I jumped to college. And it really was, I didn't want to think about it, you know? Right. And Kendra, bless her heart, said, I think maybe your readers want to know how you managed to get through high school. And I was like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Because it was horrible. I hated it. I hated high school so much. It was not fun. It wasn't that I hated high school. I hated the pain I was in while I was going to high school.
Which is completely understandable. And I think the piece that a lot of readers probably relate to.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's sexual assault or being bullied or you know, parents going through divorce, whatever it is, that like pain that you just don't know how to deal with as a teenager.
Yeah. So that was, you know, I think that Kendra, that was such an important thing for her to say to me, you know, why don't you explore this? And I did. And I cried a river. I cried another whole river working on those poems. But I think ultimately they really freed me.
It was cathartic in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Brian, I have 2 more. I'm going to go quickly.
Okay, fast answers, I promise.
What book did you dislike but kept you thinking long after you had finished it?
Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. Dang. It's the only book I've ever given 1 star to on Goodreads.
Huh. Interesting.
And there's like parts of it that I really relate to in terms of white rural poverty. But refused to discuss racism in that book. And it's like, how can you not talk about racism? So coward, shameful.
So interesting.
But I keep thinking about that book.
I know. For me, it's The Fountainhead. I hated the entire book as I was reading it. And 20 whatever years later, I still think about it. Okay. Other than all of your books, you kind of mentioned.
Yeah. Grown by Tiffany.
Published, something that's already out right now that I could get right now.
Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park.
Which one? Sorry, say that again.
Prairie Lotus.
Prairie Lotus, yep.
By Linda Sue Park. It's a middle grade novel set, you know, Linda Sue Park is just
amazing.
Yeah. She's like,
walk the water.
Right. And she, I'm not going to say anything more about it. It's probably it's going to be my favorite book of this year.
All right.
So I had to look up a little bit of Danish because it's been a while since I've taught in Denmark. But tak for at være dig, which means thank you for being you. I think I got that right.
Awesome.
And I also got like Rhiannon Barry from Central New York, and she texted me while you were talking, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm just online with Laurie Halse Anderson." She goes, "I told you the 2 of you were going to work together one day. She's just the most human being out there." Thank you for joining us. I actually worked on the poem I wrote in response to the opening prompt, so I'll blog that out tonight because I know we got to put a cut to the show. Yeah. Tanya, how are you?
I actually think Rebecca's got 1 more piece of work. I'm good.
I do. I just want to thank you, Laurie, so much for this conversation because I learned a ton, but I also just so appreciate you taking the time and your openness and honesty. And yeah, I have a lot to think about. I loved this conversation and I'm going to keep thinking about it for a long time to come. So thank you very much. should we want to do the closing slide with our final prompt? And
I feel
Laura, I
like
love what you added to our final prompt as well. So just as we're moving out to think about, again, after this conversation, if you look back at what you wrote before, what will you speak about and what will you shout about? And Laurie added to this, and I love this. What are you afraid to speak or shout about and why? What will you do to confront that fear, and who will you ask for help? Because I think maybe it's even more important to think about what you're afraid to speak. It is more important to think about what you're afraid to speak and shout about, because that's what's holding us back.
Yeah.
So what can we do to confront that fear? And we all need a community to help us. So thank you again for your brilliance, your advice, your writing, your just being you and being in the world. So
You're being so sweet to me. I appreciate
it's
that.
very true.
And thank you for the opportunity to join you. You know where to get me. I'm happy to do anything for the writing project. So
Thank you.
find me again.
We will.
Laurie, we will. Thank you. With that amazing shout out from Laurie Halse Anderson to the writing project, we want to thank you and invite you to our community / network / I don't know, movement,
Family.
I hope. Family. Thank you, Brian. Rebecca, your questions were amazing, and I feel like I learned so many things from you, Laurie, through that interview. Everything from etymology to an idea for a new history curriculum to a reading list. We really appreciate all the work that you put in the world that helps young people find their own voice as writers, and we're super thankful for your time today. So
Pleasure.
thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you're new to the writing project, you heard it from Laurie Halse Anderson. It's a great place to hang out. You should check out our website at nwp.org. You should follow us on Twitter and Instagram. You should join our Facebook community if you want to be in conversation with teachers like Rebecca, who read and write and improve their practice every day. Thank you, everyone.
NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.